On January 1st, 2026, at 1 minute past midnight Beijing time, the global commodity market underwent its most significant change since the 1973 oil crisis. It happened quietly, without any major headlines or international announcements. Chinese authorities put into effect a sweeping set of export licensing controls. These covered silver, tungsten, and antimony, materials that are the very foundation of our modern technological world. The official notice was almost hidden, buried deep within routine regulatory updates. It restricted silver exports to just 44 state-approved companies. Each of these companies had to have a minimum annual production of at least 80 tons. Now, this wasn't just a simple market tweak. It was a complete redesign of the economic landscape, executed with surgical precision while the rest of the world was distracted. The timing was no accident. It coincided perfectly with New Year celebrations, ensuring that the initial market reaction would be minimal due to low holiday trading volumes. By the time analysts and governments around the globe finally grasped the full scale of what had happened, the fundamental supply chains for critical technology sectors had been permanently rewritten. The strategy behind these restrictions was incredibly sophisticated, something most people missed at first. China controls a massive portion of the world's silver, somewhere between 60 and 70%, through its mining, refining, and processing facilities. This dominance was built over decades of focused industrial development. The new licensing rule doesn't stop Chinese silver from being exported entirely. Instead, it consolidates all control into the hands of state-supervised companies operating directly under government oversight. And those 44 approved companies? They weren't picked out of a hat. A closer look reveals a masterclass in strategic planning. Their ownership, their production capabilities, their distribution networks, everything was carefully selected to maximize China's leverage while still appearing as a reasonable commercial decision. Together, these companies have enough capacity to meet global demand during normal times. But, and this is the crucial part, they don't have enough capacity to prevent a massive supply shortage if demand spikes or if geopolitical tensions rise. The 80-ton production minimum was also a strategic move. It effectively pushes smaller independent producers out of the export market. This concentrates access to the silver supply chain within a few large entities that are much easier for the state to monitor and control. Suddenly, silver transformed from a freely traded commodity into a strategically managed resource. Its availability no longer depended on market forces, but on getting approval from central authorities. Initially, international tech companies didn't seem too worried. They dismissed the new rules as just more bureaucracy, thinking it wouldn't seriously affect their established supply relationships. That turned out to be a disastrously naive assumption. Within just a few weeks of the new rules taking effect, procurement departments in the semiconductor, solar panel, and electric vehicle industries started getting notifications. Their existing contracts needed to be renegotiated under the new regulations. The consequences spread through global supply chains with the cold, hard certainty of a mathematical equation. Industries that rely heavily on silver found that their Chinese suppliers could no longer guarantee delivery dates or stable prices. To get their materials, they now had to navigate a complex licensing process that could add months to their procurement timelines. The just-in-time manufacturing systems that companies had perfected over decades began to crumble. Why? Because the availability of a critical material was now subject to administrative whims, not commercial agreements. The solar panel industry was the first to feel the intense pressure. Making photovoltaic cells requires silver for the conductive pathways, and there's no good substitute without a major loss in efficiency. China's export restrictions forced solar manufacturers into a fierce competition for a dwindling supply of available silver. All this was happening while they were under pressure to meet aggressive installation targets driven by global mandates for renewable energy. The electric vehicle sector faced a similar crisis. As battery technology advanced, the amount of silver needed for each vehicle had been increasing. Advanced battery management systems, cooling components, and high-frequency charging infrastructure all depend on silver's unique electrical and thermal properties. The delays caused by the export licensing directly led to production bottlenecks, which in turn delayed vehicle deliveries throughout 2026. Electronics manufacturing also woke up to a supply chain vulnerability that had been hidden for years by abundant, cheap silver. Your smartphone, your computer, and the advanced semiconductors inside them all contain silver. The amount in each device is tiny, but when you add it all up across global production, it becomes a massive volume. And since so much of this manufacturing is concentrated in China, it gave the authorities even more leverage when implementing these controls. But the strategy wasn't just about silver. This was a comprehensive plan for resource control. Similar restrictions were placed on tungsten and antimony, materials that are essential for defense, aerospace, and other advanced industries. The fact that all these materials were targeted with similar frameworks suggests a coordinated long-term strategy for managing strategic resources, not just isolated regulations. The international response showed a fundamental misunderstanding of what was happening. Policymakers focused on the immediate price fluctuations instead of the long-term threat to supply security. Traditional tools like sanctions and trade restrictions proved useless against a strategy that operates perfectly within the legal framework of international commerce, yet achieves powerful strategic goals through simple administrative procedures. The timing of China's move also seemed suspiciously aligned with recent announcements from other countries. Many nations had just designated silver as a critical strategic material, emphasizing the need for secure supply chains. It felt like a coordinated global recognition that silver availability was now a matter of national security, not just a commercial issue. In response, allies of major economic powers started their own resource accumulation strategies. They launched aggressive stockpiling programs, realizing they could no longer assume they could get critical materials just by being willing to pay the market price. This transformation is also shaking up the financial markets in ways that go far beyond commodity prices. Companies that depend on Chinese silver are now facing huge operational uncertainty. Credit rating agencies have started factoring these supply chain vulnerabilities into their risk assessments. A risk that was once considered minor is now seen as a major threat to business continuity, affecting company valuations and investor confidence. Even currency markets are feeling the effects. Nations are realizing that their technological progress is dependent on access to materials controlled by potential adversaries. The power to restrict critical exports has become a form of economic leverage, as powerful as traditional military or diplomatic pressure, but without triggering a conventional military response. What we are witnessing is a new paradigm in international relations. Resource control is now a more effective tool for achieving strategic goals than traditional methods of power projection. We've moved beyond simple trade relationships into a new system where getting the materials you need depends on your geopolitical alignment, not just your ability to pay. The events of January 1st were an acceleration of a trend that had been building for years. The consolidation of strategic material control into state-supervised entities was the result of systematic preparation for a new era of economic competition, one where access to resources determines who wins the race for technological and industrial dominance. The global technology sector now faces a fundamental choice. It can either accept its growing dependence on supply sources that can be restricted at any moment, or it can invest massive resources into building alternative supply chains. But creating those alternatives could take decades to achieve the scale and reliability needed. The simple math of this new reality suggests that our current market relationships are unsustainable under this kind of sustained strategic pressure. A silent siege has begun. It's not being fought with armies or weapons, but with administrative procedures and regulatory filings. But for nations whose entire future of technological advancement depends on materials they don't control, the strategic implications are just as profound. Thanks for watching. If you found this analysis insightful, please like, share, and subscribe for more content.